Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar on decarbonising transport. Thank you very much for dialing in. This week marks 1 year to go until the COP26 Climate Change Summit in Glasgow, and HS2 have been hosting a series of webinars this week to mark the occasion. On Monday, we heard about how our stations will be some of the most sustainable in the world. On Wednesday, we heard about how we're creating a new green corridor along the line of route, and today we'll be hearing how we will contribute to the decarbonisation of the transport sector more broadly. You'll be hearing from Neil Waite from HS2 Limited and Maggie Simpson from the Rail Freight Group. We open all live events with some technical advice should you experience any connection issues. All lines are muted, so you don't have to worry about any background noise. If your feed freezes, wait for a few seconds as it will most likely correct itself. If this doesn't happen, use the leave button to exit the call and rejoin using the event link. You'll be able to use a toggle at the bottom of your screen to rewind back to where you left. You can also pause at any point during the call should you need to. If you disconnect and you're unable to rejoin due to a wider Microsoft incident, we will email you with the next steps. There is a Q&A and comment function which you should be able to find at the top right-hand side of your screen. Please feel free to submit your questions throughout the event, and we will ask them to speakers at the end. So that's all from me. I'm now going to hand over to our first speaker, Neil Waite.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining this webinar. I'm Neil Waite. I'm the Acting Head of Environmental Sciences in the Infrastructure Directorate at HS2. And I'm going to speak to you about how HS2 is going to deliver a low carbon alternative for long distance travel in the UK. The transport sector is currently the largest contributor to greenhouse gases. As you can see there in the schematic, 28% of all emissions are from the transport sector. And within that, over 80% comes from road sources. HS2 are going to be at the heart of decarbonising the transport sector and helping the government meet its aim in 2050 to be net zero carbon. So how low carbon will riding on HS2 be? Well, you can see from the schematic that per passenger completing 1 kilometre of journey, HS2 is over 7 times less carbon intensive than taking a journey on a private car, and over 17 times less carbon intensive than using domestic flights. So this shows HS2 is going to provide a long-term solution and a long-term low carbon alternative form of transport for the UK. But in addition to that, the real benefit of HS2 is the modal shift and the opportunity it will create to get people off those planes and out of those cars. And I wanted to reflect on a couple of examples of where this is so significant in changing people's behaviours. So reducing domestic flights first. We've got great confidence using Spain as an example, whereby when high-speed rail became available there, people chose to use the high-speed railway to the extent that it's virtually eliminated all domestic flights. So people are choosing, when high-speed rail is available, the option of taking that railway. And you can see really from yourself, if you've taken an internal flight, going to the airport, checking in, waiting for the flight, getting on the plane, journeys, getting off again. You know, by the time you're sort of on the plane, if you look at the high-speed rail time figures, you're already at the city of destination and continuing your journey. It's also really important to think about changing behaviour, getting people out of cars. And there's a number of reasons for this. There's a lot of congestion, a lot of road dependency at the moment. And I use the example where at the moment, friends and colleagues who live in London, their households might not have a car because it's deemed they don't need one. They've got the tube network, they can get around the city and they can travel, or they may only have 1 car. But outside of London, the car is king. Everyone who can drive in a house has their own car. Most households where I live, there's 2 cars. And as soon as the kids get to 17, 18, 19, the default is get the car. So HS2 will be creating this opportunity where people can actually think about changing their habits and reliance on cars. People can work in Birmingham, Manchester and Leeds with the jobs that HS2 will create. and they'll have the connectivity to not actually need a car. When they go on holiday or do business trips, they can get to any airport in the country. They can visit friends in other cities quickly and efficiently on a low carbon transport solution. So it's really in the future changing that embedded behaviour, and that's the opportunity HS2 brings. Similarly as well, we've seen this week the government make the announcement about cars being electric only for purchase from 2030, which is a significant positive move for decarbonising that sector. But even if overnight all the cars tomorrow would be electric, there is still the case that HS2 needs to deliver this modal shift. And there's a number of reasons for that. First of all, our roads are already congested, excuse me, and that causes an economic cost to the country. And secondly, even with electric cars, there is still public health issues to address. The most harmful emissions from cars are these small particulates that come from the brake dust and tyre wear. So even replacing cars to electric, you may have zero tailpipe emissions, but you've still got these damaging particulate matters, PM2.5 they're called, from electric vehicles. So there's still a need to reduce the amount of cars on our roads. And at the moment, if you're following the development of the Environment Bill, the government will be bringing in PM2.5 targets in the future. They are not only to reduce cities that have excessive levels, but also across the whole country, however low the background is, to reduce that further. And that's because there's no safe level for these pollutants. So there is a need to reduce those, and the only way you're going to do that is by taking cars off the road. So as well as providing modal shift for domestic flights and changing behaviour and getting people out of cars, there are also benefits of moving freight to rail. And we have Maggie Smith from the Rail Freight Group, who will talk about this in more detail in a moment. HS2 will also create a legacy going forward, forming the basis of the lower carbon economy. You can see on this slide, the bar chart shows HS2's carbon footprint during construction. So the bar chart on the left is by activity, and the pie chart on the right, it's the same data, is by contract type. So we've tasked our contractors during the construction of HS2 to drive out carbon emissions in design and construction. Our contractors and their design houses are coming up with innovative ways to reducing carbon in the assets we'll build. We've seen that already in some of the designs that have been released to the stations, the use of renewable materials, the use of less materials, making buildings that will be low energy in operation. And similarly in construction, we're looking at new ways and using our innovation process to develop new techniques to reuse materials on site. So we don't need hundreds of lorries to move things away and then hundreds of lorries to bring materials back in again. We're also driving innovation for construction plant and machinery, new technology. Our door is open to SMEs and companies to trial their new products on our sites, prove they work in a construction environment, then make them the new norm. So by doing all these activities during construction, what we're actually doing is creating a legacy that is going to be the foundation of the low carbon economy, and those skills and applications will then run out and benefit other projects and other construction projects across the whole of the UK. I will now pass over to Maggie Simpson, who's from the Rail Freight Group, who will give us some more detail of the modal shift benefits of getting lorries off the road.
Thank you very much, Neil, and thank you for the introduction. I'm Maggie Simpson. I'm the Director General of the Rail Freight Group. For those of you who don't know us, we are a trade association representing businesses across the rail freight sector, around about 120 businesses ranging from freight train operators and customers, ports, terminals, support services, rolling stock manufacturers, and so on. Our aim as an organisation is to grow the amount of freight that's moved by goods in the UK. And it's a pleasure to be here today talking about how High Speed 2 can help our ambitions to grow rail freight and in doing so decarbonise transport in the UK. But standing back, why do I think that we ought to be growing rail freight in the UK today? There are 5 reasons that I like to highlight for the strategic case for doing that. Clearly, and most importantly for today, modal shift to rail freight is vital to decarbonise transport, and we'll be talking more about that in a few moments. But but we produce a lot less carbon dioxide than road for an equivalent trip, and equally we produce less air quality particulates and pollutants as well. So the environment is a really big driver of why we should invest in rail freight, but it's not only that. Rail freight's helping our economy. We're seeing the prospect of new trade deals post-Brexit, the potential for new free port zones with the bidding for that announced last week. And this will all require excellent inland links by road and rail to support UK exporters and business to make absolutely the very best of those opportunities. Time to market is an absolutely critical factor, and rail freight helps with that. Growing rail freight is also good for job creation. For example, new rail-linked warehousing sites might employ 6,000–7,000 people on site, working not just in the rail but in the warehousing and other businesses on site. And we're driving productivity by making that transport link cost-effective for people to use. Rail freight is supporting the construction of High Speed 2. We'll talk about that in a moment, but it's not only High Speed 2. We're delivering materials for roads, for homes, for offices, and for a whole host of projects across the country, which in themselves are helping to drive and rebalance our economy. And so we think with the right support, the rail freight sector is absolutely ready to step up to growth and to help the UK to move into post-COVID recovery as we move into next year. But we're here today to talk about the environment and about decarbonisation. So where does rail freight fit into that story? And we know that today, right now, one of the best things we can do to decarbonise UK transport is to move more freight by rail where we can. Because moving freight by rail today, even with the existing traction mix, produces a lot less carbon than moving it by road. But looking forward, there's also more we're doing to try and drive those carbon emissions down even more. We're trying to allow our trains to use electric power more where they can, even within the existing fleet of locomotives that we have, to make most use of the electrified network wherever we can. And we know government is engaged in discussions about how that electrification programme can be rolled forward, with some really exceptionally good work by Network Rail supporting that. My members are already talking about what the locomotive of the future needs to be: electric, bi-mode, and what options there are for replacing diesel in that bi-mode in the fullness of time. And we're looking at how we can decarbonise the equipment used in our terminals. That might be battery shunt locomotives, it could be electric reach stackers and handling equipment, and there's a great deal of research and innovation going into that space across the sectors at the moment. But most particularly and most importantly is where we are today. Because when we're trying to decarbonise our economy, we cannot wait for a miracle to happen in 2049. We need to be moving today. And that's where modal shift is really the answer. So we know that the most important thing is modal shift, and that's where HS2 starts to come in. Hugo, can you move my slide just one? Thank you very much. This is a graphic from HS2 and one that we absolutely support, that modal shift onto rail is producing 76% less carbon emissions than taking the equivalent road journey. And we know that the more goods we can get on each train, the longer we make each train, the better that carbon percentage is. And we're pushing really hard to try and make sure that we get absolutely the most carbon saving on each journey that we can. And it's also important to remember that when we're talking about High Speed 2, and we'll talk about the capacity release in a moment, we're releasing capacity on probably the most environmentally friendly corridor for rail freight. That's the West Coast Main Line, where most of our electric services run today. My colleagues in Scotland tell me that 45% of all rail freight in Scotland is hauled by electric traction, even better environmental credentials. And by releasing capacity on the West Coast Main Line, we absolutely make the most of that. And that's why I think HS2 is vital for freight growth. We know that phase 1 and 2A, which are already in construction or have powers, free up paths for us on the West Coast Main Line south of Crewe. And further phases will bring more capacity available for use by freight. And if you say to me, well, Maggie, but which trains are going to use that freed up capacity? I mean, the simple truth today is, I don't know. It will depend what our customers want. Well, what are the kind of trains that are likely to make use of that? Well, imported and exported goods. And with Brexit coming, those trade routes are changing. We're expecting to see more trains coming from ports such as Liverpool, but also sustained growth into the big ports, Southampton, London, Felixstowe and others. But those goods from those ports need to get to the consumers in Manchester, in Scotland, in the West Midlands, and rail is a key in that. But it isn't only import, it's about businesses in those cities and towns being able to export too. So taking trains to those ports for exports across the globe is really critical. It's also about consumer goods, the train we can see there, which is moving supermarket products in roll cages. It comes from the big warehouses in the Midlands to stores across the country. And many, many more of those trains in the last few years starting to operate. In fact, even in the last few weeks, we've seen 2 or 3 new routes starting to run. And the potential for retailers to move more of their products on rail, particularly on longer distance journeys, such as those that the capacity that will be released will enable, is absolutely critical. And as the wider network grows, it won't just be the cities of Manchester, Birmingham, but also bringing in Leeds and cities in the East Midlands, as well, of course, as Glasgow and Edinburgh and other locations. And it isn't just about containers. The Peak District Quarry Cluster is one of our most important resources for building materials, and release capacity from High Speed 2 will help that important sector grow. And we have several members looking at new types of rail freight, new models, getting high-speed logistics up and running, parcels traffic, all our home online shopping and retail products moving potentially at higher speed on the network in that capacity. But it isn't only about what HS2 can do for rail freight, it's also about what rail freight is doing for High Speed 2. And this picture, which landed right in the middle of perhaps the gloomiest part of 2020, as the second wave was just starting to become apparent, I think really cheered everybody up. It was the first train running directly bringing construction materials in for High Speed 2 into Birmingham to support the early enabling works for that important part of the project. That train was the first of many. We know that the number of trains will grow as we move into next year, bringing construction materials in, so aggregate, sand, cement and so on, taking out construction spoil from the tunnel sections, and in due course bringing in components such as tunnel linings and other things which are essential for the construction of this important route. And every time we can use rail to support the construction, it's bringing down the carbon footprint of High Speed 2, which Neil spoke about a few moments ago. And as the programme ramps up, I think we're expecting to see probably up to 20 trains a day supporting that construction. But of course, there's a longer legacy from this as well. The terminal there at Washwood Heath will continue to exist after HS2 is built, supplying materials for other projects across the West Midlands. Phase 2A and for future phases offer more opportunities for rail freight to help construction. And the learning that we've had from how to do rail freight in big projects such as HS2 is also a legacy. So yesterday's consultation on Sizewell commits them to 40 to 60% of the construction materials coming in by rail or sea, using similar models and similar ways of working that HS2 has helped us to develop. And so finally, how do we make the absolute most of this opportunity? What are the supporting measures that we're looking at? Well, first, of course, HS2 releases hugely important capacity, and we want to align that on other routes to make sure we can really deliver end-to-end for our customers. We're looking at wider policies for support decarbonisation, not just in terms of mode shift, but in how we run our own businesses too. And we're making sure that rail freight customers understand the opportunity that this will be creating and really are being placed at the heart of our railway as we think about how that release capacity can be put to the best measure for the UK. So thank you very much for your attention, and looking forward to taking some questions now.
Thank you very much indeed, Maggie, and thank you to Neil as well. So you've been submitting your questions. Thank you very much indeed for that. I don't know if we'll have a chance to get through all of them, but we'll try our best. And our first question, I think it's best, Neil, if you take this one, is how will HS2 actively stimulate the modal shift to rail, as well as moving freight to other rail routes? Cost and convenience would appear to be key as well as speed?
Yes, thank you, Hugo. Exactly that, yes. I mean, I gave the example in my briefing that upon high-speed rail being available, using the Spanish example, it was taken up very, very quickly because, one, it's fast, two, it was cost effective, it's really convenient, take people from the centre of the city to the centre of the city. I think the also key thing with HS2 is it's not a premium product. It is embedded within the existing now rail network. So a lot of the work as we go from London to Birmingham, Manchester to Leeds, and the work that's happening now in the National Infrastructure Commission, looking at linking HS2 with Northern Powerhouse Rail and improvements on existing networks, really embeds HS2 within the existing network. So wherever you are in the country, you can access it and move around quickly, conveniently, which is a huge benefit over domestic flights, for example, and drives that behaviour change for people to suddenly realise they can get out of their cars and don't need to be so dependent.
Brilliant. Thanks, Neil. Probably this one as well goes to you. Presumably this low carbon travel and subsequent modal shift will help with air quality in cities, which HS2 goes to. Are you working with local authorities on their plans for this?
Yes, we are. Yes, we are is the short answer. We are working with all the local authorities. We engage with them regularly. We have regular meetings with all the local authorities on a bi-monthly basis, and I'm involved in that group. A lot of the local authorities have recently had new clean air plans published. We know about the clean air zone coming to Birmingham, for example, and the ultra low emission zone in London, and similarly Manchester as well. So it's critical we work closely with those, and we are part of the answer to their problems, getting the dependency of the car off the road. But it's also part of HS2 integrating with those combined authorities' local travel plans. So there is the clean cycleways, the trams, trains, tubes to access HS2. So from the door to the station, they don't need to be dependent on the car as well.
That's a good point. Thank you, Neil. Maggie, got a few in for you as well. This one here says, Logistics UK recently released a report which said HS2 was the only real opportunity this century to significantly improve capacity for rail freight. Do you agree with this?
Thanks. Yeah, HS2 is a huge opportunity to improve capacity for rail freight. We know that. Is it going to be the only one this century? I mean, I don't know. A century is a long time. I think we're all looking with interest at the schemes which build on High Speed 2. So Northern Powerhouse Rail, for example, could be another really important opportunity, as with Digital Rail. But in terms of those schemes which are on the table and in construction today, it's absolutely about HS2. The West Coast Main Line, even looking just at that, is one of our most important routes. It links our biggest conurbations. It links the places that freight wants to move. So the capacity that HS2 releases on the West Coast Main Line alone, before we think about other routes, is absolutely critical to our sustained growth.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Maggie. Neil, over to you on this one. Someone cited the stats you gave on your slide about emissions per kilometre in terms of, I think it was plane 170 grams per kilometre, car 67 grams, and HS2 8 grams of carbon per passenger kilometre. They say it's a nice message. Do you have the references to back that up? Perhaps one that indicates the load factors considered and any entrained carbon?
Thank you, Hugo. Yes, we do. We can provide those references to the speakers. We've done a lot of work in this area, and carbon is, with the 3 C's, carbon, capacity, are the key messages for HS2. So it's critically important we have a very robust carbon assessment that sits behind the messages we publicly say. We have a lot of environmental assessments that have been deposited for the various phases, for the environmental statement of phase 1, 2A, that's going through the final stage of the Parliament now, and a refresh being prepared, of course, for the 2B environmental statement that will be submitted at the end of next year. We've also recently set up the website, which is the HS2 Why Carbon webpage. So there's a lot of information and sources of information there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if people go to hs2.org.uk, they can find all that information there. It's quite a hefty read, so I hope that's enjoyable. I've probably got time for one more question before we let everyone get on with their lunch times from past onwards. Maggie, this one's to you. Is increasing rail freight better for business? Does it have an advantage over lorries apart from polluting a lot less?
Yeah, absolutely. So the customers who use rail freight today are obviously interested in having a low carbon solution. It's really important to them, but they wouldn't be using rail freight if it wasn't better for their business overall. So rail freight can be more cost effective, particularly over longer distances. And most importantly, it helps them make the best of their overall supply chain. Road drivers are a very scarce resource these days. And so by using rail freight on the long distances, it enables them to use their road resource really effectively on the bits that lorries have to do. We have to work with other modes, of course we do, but rail freight is something that more and more businesses are wanting to be part of and are investing in.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that, Maggie. So that's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Thank you for tuning in to this lunchtime webinar. We hope you found it useful and understand a bit more now about how HS2 will help to decarbonise the UK's transport network more broadly. Thank you for tuning into the other ones this week as well, if you did, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday afternoon. Thank you.